Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Today, we are talking about social media still as part of our series, and today's topic is democracy over social media, question mark. I am Allegra Davis Hanna, and I am just the host and the Vanna White of today. Your presenters are Kimberly Cox, who is an instructor of government, and Misty Wilson Mertens, who's our department chair for social sciences, and she teaches history. We all work for the Connect campus, and we are very glad that you're here to join the conversation and the presentation. So we are ready to get started, and I see that Angie has already let you know that if you have questions, you're welcome at any time to put them in the chat tool, and our presenters will hopefully have time to answer questions toward the end of the presentation. So, can you guys talk a little bit about what we know about social media and maybe why we don't know a lot yet about social media?
Sure. So when we talk about social science research, anything that is less than about 20 years old is very, very new. So I know that doesn't feel that way to some of you who've always grown up with social media, but for a historical perspective, all of this is basically in its infancy. So we don't yet know a whole lot. Social media really begins in about 2005, and in 2005, just 5% of American adults were on some form of social media. In 2011, it's 50%, and now it's about 75% of us. So it's still not even everyone. So we go from nothing, 5%, to basically all of us in 15 years. That's very, very fast. It's a huge social change. And so we are somewhat playing catch up in the social science research. What we know right now is that about 55% of adult Americans get some sort of news from social media, either often or sometimes. 28% say they get their news often, which is up about 8% from the last time we did that survey in 2018. And as Pew Research is telling us, social media is now part of our news diet. So we need to start thinking about social media as part of our culture of news information, which we haven't really done before. So all of this is brand spanking new. We're still learning.
So I noticed this slide is called a Utopia of Information, and I don't think that we would call social media a utopia. So help me understand what that means.
So for Professor Thurman, Professor Davis Hanna, and Professor Cox, I know that you guys are old enough to remember the very beginning of the internet. And we had this optimism, some people might say we were a little bit naive, that we thought the internet was going to give us so much information, good, valuable, valid information, that we would suddenly become enlightened and we would make the best decisions. As late as 2011, scholars were even talking about Facebook and social media as, quote, a force leading the expansion of the democracy into other nations, particularly the Arab Spring is what they were talking about. Some scholars called it an equalizer for disenfranchised individuals to contribute to civic engagement and to foster democratic ideals. So we really had very, very high hopes for the internet.
But that's not what happened.
No, hi, this is Kimberly. This is a kind of a pictorial of what we thought would happen and what we think is happening. And there are a lot of studies still happening. Again, as Misty said, this is a really new area. So the very first pictorial is the echo chamber. And so you're looking at echo chambers versus filter bubbles. The echo chamber is when an online user self-selects websites, information, what news they want to look at. And so you're actually consciously thinking about, I want to see this particular news, this news story, this news outlet. That's the echo chamber. And so the thought process is it would be more, combined. Everybody, again, would be exchanging information and news, the kumbaya factor, that's the echo chamber, and that we do this initially, and we did from what it looks like from the data. But the other more separated graphic is the filter bubble, and this is when an algorithm makes selections for us, either guessing via either programming, machine learning, artificial intelligence, or a combination of those, and what your interests are. And if anybody has seen Netflix's The Social Dilemma, you kind of get a idea. I think they do a really good job of showing how the algorithm starts to pick things for us. So there's this suggestion right now is that we have more algorithmic gatekeepers versus human editor gatekeepers, and humans have human ethics. Computers don't, and that's the problem. So the question is, over time, are we using more algorithmic websites, and are we no longer just doing the self-selecting? Do we have more filter bubbles? And that's kind of where the data is shifting a little bit. And I think that's where we get into, how do we look at this information? How do we think critically about it?
So is it called a filter bubble because the algorithm can tell based on the things that I've looked at what my beliefs or views might be, and then it's filtering information or leading me toward particular sites to keep me in my thought bubble? Is that why it's called that?
Yeah, basically. And when you look at the algorithms and how they select, it really depends on the company, if it's YouTube or Facebook, or how they're set up. And I'm not someone who is really technical on this side, but my understanding of it is yes. So the more you look at particular types of content, you'll be directed to that content. And on some platforms, it does go to the extreme, which we'll talk about in a little bit for sure. And Misty may have more on that.
So the like button seems like it would be a good thing. Is it not?
It seemed very benign, didn't it?
It seemed like, hey, like a high five. Like, I like that. That just seems positive. But it's not, right?
But it hasn't become that. So in 2009 and 2010, the like button is floated by Facebook. And this actually changed some language on Facebook. If you guys were early users of Facebook, I wasn't, but if you were, before likes, we had things called fans. So if I wanted to go to TCC and find their Facebook page, I wouldn't like it. I would have been a fan of it. But in 2010, that shifted to being likes. So I like a page, I don't fan it. What this is going to do is start to allow Facebook to collect information that eventually is going to feed the algorithm, which we'll talk about here in a minute. This also becomes a real boon for advertisers, because if they can see what I have liked previously, then they know what I might like in the future. And this becomes something of a cash cow for Facebook because they're getting advertiser money from it. And anytime you start throwing cash at something, it has a tendency to become a little less altruistic or benign than maybe it was originally imagined. And the other thing that's really important about the creation of the like button is that Facebook is going to, in 2010, allow news organizations to start putting like buttons on their articles. So before, there was no real way other than just clicks for a newspaper to tell what was getting engagement and what was not. So you still had a lot of people behind the scenes driving local content. But the more and more and more that we get these like buttons and we get engagement from readers, we start to see content being driven by likes rather than the other way around, if that makes sense. And then all of that is going to, again, help create the algorithm.
I like the way that you talk about the algorithm like it's some evil force out in the wilderness. The algorithm.
I like the picture there too. It looks like some sketchy, shadow person. So the creation of the algorithms, if we're looking at that, I have it there. The algorithm determines which posts a user would see based on predicted engagement. So we're looking at the attention economy at this point. So most of these businesses, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whoever, are based on the attention. Their business model is set up on the attention economy. So the more eyeballs they get on something, the more likes they get on something, as Misty just went through, the better it is for their profit. And so I think that that's something to keep in mind. So the question that becomes is, with scholars, are we getting algorithmic radicalization? And so there's different studies. It's been debated. And again, since this is such a new area, we're seeing studies come out differently based on who is doing the study, I think. So YouTube recommendations are responsible, for example, for about 70% of the total time users spend on YouTube. And when YouTube did their own study, they found no radicalization. Go figure, I think. But anyway, I'm just being skeptical. I'll be honest. But other studies have shown that YouTube's algorithmic favors left-leaning and political neutral channels, and that they'll steer people away from radicalizing influences. And then you'll see studies that found YouTube does steer people towards radical content, because what happens, they've seen over watch time, is that it's really interesting talking, listening to one of the podcasts I was listening to. They were doing a talk on this particular piece, and they were focusing on YouTube specifically. They said one of the studies that they did, it looked like the longer you were on YouTube and going through the recommendations, the more radical and extreme the recommendations got. So again, it all kind of depends on who's doing the research. And I think a lot of it is, as Misty said, it's such a new area. We'll probably know more in the next 5 to 10 years, but right now it's so new.
So I see some clickbait. I'm trying to click on it. It's not taking me anywhere.
You should never click on those. Don't ever do that. So in 2012, Upworthy, which this surprised me that this came from Upworthy. Upworthy started to pioneer headline click testing. So they would go across dozens of variations and kind of have the same headline, but tweak it a little bit and see which headline generated the largest click numbers. So you guys have all seen headlines like this. You won't believe this one thing. Click here for one quick trick. This simple solution. And then you can't see the rest of it. So you click on it just to see what it is. This wasn't meant to be bad. Again, the founders of Upworthy are trying to share uplifting, positive news stories, but they are so effective with this strategy that other people adopt it. So when we're looking at what's driving likes, what's driving engagement, what's driving that ad money, which again is all going to play into how we are reading the news and our political ideas that we're forming, this is a big piece of it. If there is something out there that has a really good news source, but it doesn't have a catchy headline, a lot of people aren't going to click on it. And you guys all know that some people are going to share things have only read the headline, right? They haven't read the actual news source behind it. So this is something we're seeing in the research that we need to be aware of, and we need to train ourselves to recognize what we're seeing and to read the whole thing, which we don't often do.
So talk to me about the First Amendment and social media, because we hear a lot of people in the media, we hear politicians, we hear a lot of people talk about how First Amendment rights get violated and or protected by social media companies. So can you help us clear that up, Professor Cox?
Yeah, and the talk that Misty and I did previous to this one, last week, we went into a lot of the laws and where the U.S. and states stand independently versus even Europe, where they said there's not a whole lot of protection in cyberspace. I'm going to be just real honest. When we look at the First Amendment and free speech, what we're really looking at is what applies to the government's censorship of speech. So, are there limitations on what you can say? Well, pretty much you can think what you want to think, and you can almost say whatever you want, as long as, and I'm kind of being very general here, as long as there is not being created an immediate safety concern or national security issue. Those are kind of the two main categories that you watch out for. Is there a immediate security issue for individuals or the public, or is there a national security issue? Other than that, there's a lot of freedom with what you can say online, and even in the real world, I say offline, it's the same. So you have to think of it as when I start talking, am I going to cause immediate harm? That's what they're looking at. There were even if you're posting pictures online, and I was thinking about this the other day, there were a couple of cases here in Fort Worth. It's been several years back, and it had to do with cross burning. It was the visual and what people were saying at these events. Okay, one of them was a cross burning on someone's lawn. Like some people just set up a cross on an African American family's lawn and set it on fire. The other one was a group on private land that did the same thing and had material that they were passing around to each other. Um, the group that was doing it privately, not in public, not causing harm to anybody in the public sphere, did not get in trouble under the law, under First Amendment. But obviously the one where it was a random act of, well, probably not random, but anyway, an act where someone burned a cross in someone's lawn. And that's where you're looking at speeches. You're looking at where does the harm come in. And I think when we look at how it's policed online, it's the same standard that they're using. They really have not updated it yet. There is some confusion when it comes to looking like companies online, for example, refuse service or refuse, like cut people off, which we'll talk about here in a minute on a couple of examples where people have been banned or content has been banned. But a lot of this in the real world and even online is based on public accommodation. So if they look at companies banning people's speech, is it as a discriminatory act? So it almost leans towards discrimination versus a pure First Amendment argument, which I know is getting kind of technical, but it's again, there isn't a whole lot out there. And then you get into Fourth Amendment search and seizure and what can be searched and seized in a privacy content online. If you start posting certain material online, is it private? Is it not? And all the law I've looked at so far is it's similar to offline, meaning you can pretty much post and say what you want. Again, as long as it's not causing harm to anybody immediately, or national security, but it's going to require police and other entities, government entities, to err towards getting a warrant first. So, how absolute are our free speech rights online? It really depends if it's public or private. You kind of use the cross-burning thing. Is it in a public or private section of the internet? It also depends on if that speech is coupled with immediate violent action or the potential for immediate violent action to harm anybody. So that's kind of where it stands. It's not real fleshed out, and I'll just be honest about that.
I think one place that this has been very publicized is with President Trump and Twitter and being removed from Twitter. So can you talk to us about whether that was legal and why?
Yeah. So the question is it legal? And the answer is yes, it's perfectly legal to do. So private companies like Twitter or Facebook also banned them for a while. They can do that. They are private entities. They are not government entities. And so anytime you're looking at violations of First Amendment or discrimination or search and seizure and all that kind of stuff, private and public entities come into play. Which one is it? Trump also too was not in a protected class, because sometimes you have discriminatory issues you can look at. He's not, for example, a woman. He's not a minority, so he wasn't in a protected class. Had he been in a protected class, had there been a government entity that banned him, then it would have been illegal. But because they're private entities and he's not in a protected class, he's tough out of luck. And you look at Twitter and Trump, there's some questions out there about internet service providers, because I know net neutrality and that whole debate's been a really big deal lately. If AT&T, for example, I know they're a private entity, so they're not a governmental entity. If they banned everybody on their platform from internet access through net neutrality issues, that we think would be illegal. So it, again, kind of depends. There's this really interesting thing that happened in Idaho, and I have to look at my notes. There was a small internet service provider that offered, they didn't do it just kind of carte blanche, they offered to block access to Twitter and Facebook after the January 6th riots because customers were angry that Trump was banned and they, quote, didn't want it on their internet. They didn't want, Twitter and Facebook on their internet because they were banning Trump. And federal net neutrality laws, if they were in place, would prevent this. And there's a Washington state net neutrality law that was, I think that they're working on the lawsuit on this one on, but there's no real overall protection under net neutrality. And this is where the FCC has some issues and net neutrality has some issues that I think that Congress is going to have to solve. It's the same thing we looked at in the last talk that Missy and I did, is there's no overreaching federal protection. It's all state by state right now in these various areas, and that makes it really confusing. And then another one example is Parler, and that's the red P there. Amazon, basically what they did is, Amazon Web Services, I should say, banned Parler, the app. And also Parler, you know, decided, well, they're going to sue Amazon. Twitter was involved in this because it kind of stemmed from the Twitter banning of Trump as well. But what Parler is suing Amazon based on is Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And think monopolies on this one. This is that Amazon is a huge monopoly and Parler's the little guy and they're stepping on them, and that's not okay. So they're using more of a monopoly lawsuit in that case. They also are using a breach of contract lawsuit, or as part of the lawsuit. Amazon Web Services apparently did not provide the required 30-day notice of termination. They only gave Parler about 30 hours notice before they banned them. And the last one that they're working on through this lawsuit is that Amazon intentionally interfered with the potential loss of millions of dollars in customers. So there's a contract dispute, there's a monopolies dispute, that type of stuff. I did check. Parler is back as of February 2021, and they basically are back and building again. I was looking at the statistics too, and this app was downloaded more than 11 million times since its launch, and 9 million of those were in the US alone, which I thought was really interesting. So they do have a potential to become a Twitter rival, if that makes sense.
But as it stands now, you can't use you can't download the app from the App Store or from Google Play Store, right? You can't.
As far as I know, you can't. You have to go on their site and get it through them. From what I could tell, I didn't download it, I'll be honest, but because I didn't want to do that. But it was not. You can't find it on the major app stores. You have to go through Parler's website. So this particular example is on censorship, and this was done by a group called Gambler's Pick. And if you're thinking, what the heck with Gambler's Pick, they actually do different studies on things that work like gambling, which I think probably something we may talk about in the next talk that we do, because all of this works a lot or is set up a lot like a gambling addiction in some ways. But Gambler's Pick did this study, and they found that 1 in 4 Americans felt that social media companies have a moral obligation to censor the content. And then they also looked at social media companies. They said they think that most of the people thought that social media companies also have a right to censor content on their platforms. What I thought was really interesting was I wanted to know, what does the political divide also do to this particular censorship issue? So 73% of Democrats and 71% of Republicans think it's okay to flag posts as elected representatives as inaccurate or misleading, which is really close. And I was very surprised by that. I don't know if anybody else is, but across the board in this particular study, it looked like most of us were okay with companies flagging things as potentially misleading or inaccurate. And so I think that this is a really interesting area to kind of continue to look at, is how is censorship affecting us? What do we think of it? Because I think there's going to have to be some buy-in from the public on both sides of the political spectrum. We're talking about politics and democracy, on what should and should not be censored, what speech should and should not be allowed.
So social media isn't just an issue in the United States, right? So can you guys talk to us about some global problems that have been caused or exacerbated by social media?
So in the United States, the thing that we keep coming back to is that social media has created a more divisive electorate. We tend to, like we said, put ourselves in filter bubbles. We tend to not want to hear the other side. We only look at our particular people's view of things. That's not isolated to us. So what we're now seeing is that type of behavior is expanding wherever social media expands. So we've seen social media move us towards authoritarianism and away from liberalism. That is not liberalism like Democrats in the United States liberalism. That is Western Enlightenment liberalism. And we're starting to see a crackdown on things like what we have considered human rights and human freedoms. Because our technology is increasing, we're seeing increasing surveillance, and it's becoming easier to manipulate election information or data. And we're also seeing that certain political parties are trying to influence opinion through less than above board means. We're seeing a rise in populism, which is not necessarily bad, but populism has a tendency to lead to extremism in certain groups, and we're seeing hyper-partisanism like we're seeing in the United States. So all of that is very broad, and we thought that maybe it'd be easier to understand this if we just picked a few countries and talked about those specific examples and what's happening, so you can really understand what we're saying.
So the first one is China, and China controls information within their borders to what I would say is a severe extent. They have been limiting information prior to COVID, obviously. That's when we kind of first see, I think, as far as recent news, where they were blocking a lot of the news about COVID and what was happening with the startup of COVID and how it was expanding through their country. So that's part of it. The more current one that I wanted to bring up was the Uyghur people in the, I'm going to mispronounce this region, the Xinjiang region. It is the genocide and the encampments that are being constructed around the Uyghur people, which is a Muslim minority group. The UN just actually did a whole report on this. It's the UN Genocide Convention, and they listed that China was violating all provisions of the Genocide Convention, not just of you, but all of them. And China is a signer of that convention, so that's problematic. And that's a fairly new report. So it'll be interesting to see what the UN and the countries like the US and others that are signers to this agreement do. Newsline Institute for Strategy and Policy says that Chinese government bears state responsibility for an ongoing genocide, excuse me, against the Uyghur in breach of the UN Genocide Convention as well. And up to 2 million Uyghur people were placed in detention centers where people are indoctrinated, sexually abused, and forcefully sterilized is what they're showing. Now, what did China say? China says it's not true. They say they are tamping down on the Uyghur people to prevent religious extremism and terrorism. And they say genocide is definitely not happening, but they will not allow independent, impartial, and open investigations in the country. So how do we get to the internet piece of this? The government basically took to Twitter and amassed 1.5 million followers. And then they disseminated information such as it's all a hoax and don't believe Western leaders and they're just racist against Chinese people. They also, and this is the one I went down the rabbit hole in this one because it was so interesting. They're also investing billions of dollars worth of surveillance to keep tabs on these groups of people. So they're used as intimidation method. They're used in a very intrusive way. And the system will tap into networks of neighborhood informants and track individuals and analyze their behavior, try to anticipate their potential crime, protests, or violence, and recommend which security forces to deploy if there's ever a problem. So I'm just gonna, I don't have it in the slide in my parts of the slide anywhere, but John Oliver, if you guys know him, he's a comedian, but he did, I believe in July, it's in the summer of last year, he did a kind of profile on this. And the only reason I recommend watching it if you like John Oliver and his comedy too, but he highlights some of the intrusive measures. If you look at some of the footage that he uses, I think some is from The Economist, which is a very good source. They have cameras everywhere outside of people's houses to monitor them day and night. They forcibly make them download tracking apps on their phones. It's intrusive to the extreme. Another good example is Nigeria, and you guys probably remember Boko Haram and the kidnapping. I believe it's 2014. There were about 200 to 250 girls were kidnapped by Boko Haram, which is an extremist group. It's and most of this happened in the northeast of the country because that's where Boko Haram tends to be more prominent. And so initially, what was happening is they were trying to hide this and say it wasn't happening, and it became a big social media. You can see the pictures there, a big social media kind of boom about bring back our girls, and the girls were returned. This is still happening. I did actually do some research to see is it still happening, and unfortunately it is. And I dug a little bit more into Nigeria. Nigeria is along with South Africa, it kind of rotates between the two, the largest country and has the largest population in Africa. And it's also the largest oil producer. So the US cares about it quite a bit when this stuff happens. So I thought that was an interesting kind of look too. But this was one I like to highlight because you had it hidden, and also people within the country were trying to control social media, say it was a hoax, it wasn't happening, they're trying to hide it, but then it kind of blows up on social media.
So I wanted to take a minute and talk about Honduras, because what's happening in Honduras, we've also seen happen in the United States. It's just happening in Honduras to a level that is more easily identifiable and just kind of blatant. So the head of the Honduras government was opening several thousand fake accounts on Twitter and Facebook. And these accounts were used as bots to be pro-government and to try to swing the election in favor of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez. Thousands of fake accounts were found on Facebook. So democracy relies on an engaged and informed electorate. If the electorate cannot be reasonably sure of the information they're getting, they can't make responsible decisions at the ballot box. So Facebook found, like I said, several thousand of these fake accounts, and they shut them down. Which, so good on Facebook, they did the right thing. The problem is those accounts were reopened within 60 days. So this is kind of an example of whack-a-mole. It's happening so fast, and these tech companies are coming behind the curve that they can't keep up. To really make the impact that they would need to make, Twitter and Facebook would need to hire thousands of people who speak the language, who are familiar with the culture on the ground and the political parties, to make the decision if these are actual people or if they're bots. And that's kind of asking a lot. One of the Facebook analysts who's left her job since says that she feels like she has blood on her hands because she had to prioritize which accounts to shut down and which accounts not to. And in certain cases, violence broke out. In El Salvador and Indonesia, specifically, we had lots of violence around the last elections.
So Uganda is another example, and in Uganda, it revolves around a presidential election. So you have the current president who's 76 years old, and he was facing 10 challengers, and there was one in particular, Bobby Wine, who was a pop star, was well known, that was really gaining traction. So what the Ugandan president did is he shut down the entire internet for 5 days. Now the social media platforms, I checked those yesterday, are still shut down from what I can tell. The internet is back up, and if you had a VPN prior to the 5-day internet shutdown, you can still get internet, but if you didn't, you can't get it now because now they blocked the VPNs from downloading the apps. They've blocked all the app stores in the country that you can get online with. So it's kind of crazy. But part of what he said is why he did it is he was watching the January 6th Capitol riots and what was going on here in the US. And he said that he wanted to prevent something similar from happening in Uganda. But it's not the first time. In 2006, they shut down all the government websites that were critical, or all the sites that were critical of the government. In 2011, they limited text messaging in the whole country. And in 2016, social media and money transfers were also halted. So it's not the first time. And just as of March 4th, I found an article of March 4th, 177 people were still being detained in a military detention site because they protested the shutdown of the internet. So Facebook is also a part of this. Facebook was blocking some of the pro-government accounts, or Facebook was actually blocked in Uganda uh, for blocking Facebook. What they did is they blocked some of the pro-government accounts. Sorry, and so Uganda basically blocked Facebook as well. I want to say Facebook kind of took the hit for what happened. They did jump in and say, hey, this is wrong, just like they did in Honduras, but in Uganda, they really shut down the whole internet, and they're blocking apps in general at this point, and they're detaining people over it. So it's a good example of how the internet and politics all gets intertwined.
And the last one we want to talk about is the Myanmar genocide. So if you're in the chat, I posted a link to Genocide Watch, which is a resource that I like to give all of my students. If you're interested in genocide, this gives you a level of alert around the world. So what's happening in Myanmar now is considered an emergency situation. And that means that a genocide has either started or will start any day. So click on that, you'll get more information than the quick little information we're about to give you, but I wanted y'all to have that in case you really want to dig into this. So I'll let Professor Cox start this.
Okay, so the Myanmar genocide is something that's been going on for quite a while. If you look back, it's 2010. Facebook allowed its app to be used without incurring a data charge. It's really, really, really expensive to get a SIM card for your phone. It costs hundreds of dollars in Myanmar, and it's a very poor country. So Facebook decided to allow its app to be downloaded to phones without incurring a data charge. So if you bought a phone as of 2010 in this country, you would get preloaded Facebook, and the owners of the store where you bought it would show you how to use it, and that's how you would do most of your communication. So then basically members of the Myanmar military were behind in 2015. If we kind of look forward, a systematic campaign on Facebook that targeted the country's mostly Muslim Rohingya, and I may be mispronouncing that, I apologize, minority group. So you have the Buddhist population and the Muslim population, who's an ethnic minority in that country, kind of fighting against each other. And there's a lot of discrimination that's going on, and harm that's being done. And UN, the estimates are about 24,000 people were killed by the military and local Buddhists, actually Buddhists participating, since what were called the clearing operations that started in 2017. Over 18,000 women and girls were raped, 116,000 were beaten, and 36,000 were thrown into fire. So, and that's not even to mention the 700,000 that fled the country and became refugees. So it's a huge deal, and you've probably seen some of it on the news at this point.
So the Myanmar military was using Facebook, again, through bot accounts, sometimes through fake accounts, and was claiming there was voter fraud in 2020. And that ramped up into violence. And so Facebook banned the military as of February 1st due to this coup that was coming, or happening, I guess I should say. But Facebook is the internet for Myanmar. There is no difference. For us, we don't want to use Facebook, we'll go to Google. They don't have that option. So we are really entangling politics, the internet, misinformation, bot accounts. All of that is wrapped up here. And it's going to be hard to disentangle it and sort this out. And again, we gave you a link there. I'm going to give you another link to a New York Times article that has a more in-depth explanation than we have time to do here. We could do a whole webinar on genocide. We really could.
Definitely.
Not that we should, because that would be very sad.
It'd be very, very sad. It's
Aren't you guys already accused of having classes that are too sad?
Yes. Hands down, yes.
So tell us, most of us here on this webinar use social media to some degree. Tell us, what do we do? How do we be responsible? How do we protect ourselves and not contribute to any of these problems?
So I'm going to reuse some advice we gave in the well-being one. This is an extreme milkshake. It's got cotton candy, a piece of cake, icing, sprinkles, and then it's got a milkshake under all that. You could probably eat this, I don't know, once a month, maybe once every few months, and you'll probably be okay. But if you ate this every day, you're going to have a series of problems. So treat social media like it is this extreme milkshake. Know that what you're getting is being filtered. Know that what you're reading has been selected for you through algorithms. So make it a point to go read other sources and other sites. Think carefully about what accounts you're following, if they're real people or if they're bots. Think about what you've clicked on and why a page might be suggested for you. So I know this is a really benign example, but I listen to Jimmy Buffett on YouTube. I'm getting suggested a bunch of artists that I don't really like but have some very small connection to Jimmy Buffett. At least I know why they're there, right? If I'm reading politics, maybe those connections are not so obvious. Think about the sources you're reading. Make sure that they're reliable. Don't just read the headline. Make sure that you're fact checking. And for fact checking, there's a whole list of other things you can do.
So we put a lot of sources, and these are not the only ones, but Snopes, factcheck.org, PolitiFact, Washington Post. There's PolitiFact Pundit Fact, which I thought is kind of interesting. And then one for science-based medicine. That one, just because of COVID, I put that one down. They're pretty reliable. But I wanted to put a plug-in for also the LibGuides at TCC. We have some fantastic ones. I just put 2 there. So kind of what Missy said, consider source, read beyond, check the author, supporting sources, check the date. Look and see if it's a joke. If it's an article from the Onion, it's not real. I mean, it's a joke. And check your biases. I think this is Angie put in the chat. Make sure the news you consume is balanced. I recommend this all the time. Challenge yourself. You know, to watch news you don't normally watch. If a story is being reported 5 different ways on 5 different news sources, something's up. You need to kind of dig a little deeper, and ask the experts. So I think that's one thing to look at, that we need to kind of learn to think critically about this, especially digging into democracy and the internet. Sometimes the internet can do good, sometimes it does bad, but we need to be able to distinguish when that is, when there's that truth and when there's that, misinformation campaign happening.
So if I read a tweet that says that something is illegal and I'm not sure if that's true, can I ask my government professor?
Sure. Yeah. I sometimes in our discussion boards, I'll get questions where they have to ask a question in their reply, and I'll answer those questions. So I try. If I don't know, I will freely admit it, but I try on my side.
That's great. No, I appreciate that. And, think about our librarians are all, information literacy experts as well. And your professors are a great resource. But I think all of these resources are good. And we can, if you need these links, just let us know and we can make sure that you have access to them. So we have one more webinar this semester on social media. And it is about how social media affects your critical thinking and cognition. So it's called social media, #social media makes you stupid. It's May 4th. And so we look forward to everyone attending that final webinar of the semester. Professor Thurman has put in the chat a link to complete the form to get credit. If you are watching this as a recording on our YouTube channel and you are watching it in the first couple of days after it's been posted, then the link for credit would be in the video description right beneath the video. If you're watching it at another time, then you might need to contact your professor about whether you can get extra credit and what their process would be. Just keep in mind that some professors post extra credit toward the end of the semester, and that these will be sent to your professors if you fill out the form. So that form was posted at 11:40 by Professor Thurman. So if you scroll up, you should be able to see that chat message.
Over the summer, we're also going to go through all of your responses and be planning our webinar series for the fall. So if you have an idea, please put it on there. We definitely listen to them, and that's actually how we got this series. So please, please, please give us feedback.
I don't see any more questions coming in. We'll stick around just for a minute in case somebody has a question that they're typing. Otherwise, we will see you on May 4th for our next webinar. Thank you everyone for attending or for watching this, and we hope that you found it really useful and interesting.